manages teams involved in design and has been performing product development management, technology transfer, and product certification activities. He has been performing management and leadership roles since 2001. To add a feather to his cap, Sir has filed a patent in US and Indian Patent Office for system and method for enabling terminal equipment to use ADSL and LTE infrastructures. We are very fortunate to have you amidst us, sir. Thank you for accepting our invite.
Thank you, one and all. I would like to actually thank the management of Shaosun College for giving me this opportunity. Initially, I thought that I will restrict my talk only to the software aspects of networking. But then when I started preparing the presentation, I realized that there are many fundamental aspects of networking, especially when it is in the field of telecom, that actually will be very relevant today, even to people who are core computer science engineers or science graduates. So this will actually help people relate to what we are actually seeing in the real world today. So the talk mainly focuses on the history and the networking advances, particularly in the telecom domain, and in telecom, very focused on the wireless aspect. So let me begin my talk. Before that, as Professor Javapriya had mentioned, yes, I have been working in the product development area right from the beginning. I was fortunate to be associated with IIT Madras as part of their what is called TNET group, which was one of the pioneering groups in developing standards and products from India. So I was there as part of that team from the beginning, and now I'm with Tejas, which is a similar kind of environment where we design and develop products for India and for the world, but the entire design development happens in India. So we are an entirely Indian company. And this talk is going to focus on the history of, I would say, telecom, history of computer networking principles as applied to telecom, and going forward, what are the future trends that are happening in the field of telecom, again, with respect to computer networking. So please feel free to interrupt me anytime. I will switch off video so that we can focus on the presentation. There is no problem. I would like the session to be interactive. So if you think that some of the topics need a little bit more explanation, I would be glad to do that. Okay, so interrupt me anytime in between. So we will start with the history of how communication happened over the ages. Of course, some of these topics will be slightly more, I would say, different from what you've been exposed to so far. But you can actually see as the presentation proceeds how computer science and computer networking in particular actually have got interwoven into all the communication technologies which has evolved over time. So today we actually see a lot of convergence in the kind of methods that we use for computation and communication. Okay, and that's what you will see going forward. So if you see the history of telecom, okay, it all started with the telephone connection. I mean, even before telephone, there was a telegraph that was there, right? And that evolved into a voice communication. So primarily it was voice communication that was the driver for all the communication growth. And communication is a fundamental aspect, okay, whether it is actually a technically savvy field or a non-technical field, right? Communication has been a fundamental bridging block, okay, in bringing people together and making economy actually better. So the initial focus was on voice telephony. So people wanted to speak, and telephone actually came. So telephone was one of the first revolutions that happened that actually made communication very, very ubiquitous. Now, what happened was that when there is a computer networking happened, right? They wanted actually networks of computers to communicate with each other, because individual computers are good at computation, but then you need to actually get data from somewhere. You need to communicate the results somewhere else. So not just doing computation is not going to actually complete whatever activities you're doing. So you need to actually communicate with other computers. You need to communicate with human beings. So there was a need for data to be flowing between computers. So what happened was, since the telephone network was available everywhere, it was a logical choice to use the telephone network as the network for communication between computers. So I'm not sure if many of you would be aware. Okay, it was initially what was called modems that were used, which were connected to the telephone network, but instead of carrying voice, they were carrying data. So we call them as dial-up modem, because the way that we actually call somebody else is through picking up a phone and then dialing a number, right? Similar way, you dial a particular number, and that number will connect to another modem somewhere else in the network. And between these two, data was flowing instead of voice. Okay. Now, that all changed, okay, when the amount of data that needed to be transmitted, okay, increased. So through dial-up modems, you could actually transmit a few kilobits per second data. So the typical data rates were 56 kilobits per second or 98 kilobits per second. That was not sufficient very soon, because the amount of data that needed to be transmitted soon vastly exceeded the capability of this communication network. So a lot of effort was put in to create a dedicated communication network. So that's when the fiber optic communication network came into being, right? So fiber optic is a revolutionary new way by which you use light for transfer of communication, right? And that provided a very, very high capacity, much, much higher than what is possible through telephone lines. Okay, it was actually of the order of gigabits per second. But one fundamental problem that remained in such fiber communication is that fiber, being a very, very sensitive medium, in the sense that when you run fiber over long kilometers, it is very easy for the fiber to get cut. It is very difficult to bend the fiber to the extent that you want and still be able to transmit data over that. And it is also very costly to lay fiber. So because of that, only very specific pockets in the world, okay, were enabled with fiber network. So there was a need actually to have high-speed communication, yet not be dependent on fiber. Okay, and that was the motivation behind data networking over wireless. Okay, but fiber optic communication itself was a very, very mature field. Okay, and a lot of innovations happened. This particular talk is not going to be about the fiber communication. That itself is a very big topic in itself. What we're going to do is to see how wireless communication evolved, okay, right from the need for initial wireless communication to how it is evolving now, and what are the things that are going to be there in future. See, what you see on the bottom left is what is called as a gigabit passive optical network, or in other terms called GPON. This is actually the current technology that is available for bringing fiber to the home, right? So you will have a dedicated link from what is called as an optical splitter to every household. Even today, operators like Airtel or Hathway, they have such fiber infrastructure available. Okay. This is one way to bring high-speed communication into the homes and offices. But in parallel, what has happened is a revolution in terms of the data needs, right? So majority of the communication today, right, end user communication happens over wireless. Why? Because in parallel to the communication networking advances, the computation advances also grew, right? So you had computers which were fast, you had computers which were mobile and portable, right? like laptops, then morphed into mobile systems, which were actually very handy. Okay, you have tablets and mobiles. Everything is a communication device, right? They consume a lot of data, they generate a lot of data, and that data needs to be communicated with other servers everywhere in the world. So the fundamental enabler of such a revolution is communication. So communication and computation, okay, go hand in hand in kind of directing the way the market has gone and how our technological advances have spread. So there are more connected devices now. When I mean connected, they are connected to the internet, right? Everywhere, to any and every network in the world. There are more mobile users, right? Users who consume data continuously, right? This was not the case maybe 25 years ago, right? Data was a niche, I would say, use phenomena, right? Using data was confined to offices, okay, and research institutions. Now, data is being generated by everybody. So there is a need to communicate the data, right? So communication also has to advance in a way that a lot of data needs to be, right, sent between different devices. Not only that, see, it is not just communication of data from a mobile device to a central computer somewhere in the internet. People actually have started sharing data among ourselves. So you have what is called peer-to-peer communication, right? Information sharing between mobile devices. So even though they use actually, the data goes sometimes all the way back to a server and then comes back to another mobile, it finally actually is a communication between two mobiles. So that has increased the data consumption, okay, exponentially. And that in turn, okay, requires more infrastructure, more support systems which enable such data. So this talk is mainly about how that support system has evolved and what are the protocols being used, how is the communication happening, how is networking, computer networking domain has morphed into the communication networking domain. Okay, that we will actually see. So far we have seen that there is a need for such a communication system because the data, okay, requirement has exploded. Now, as I said before, the fiber optic communication system actually has matured to a large extent, and fiber optics provides a very large data rate, okay, gigabits per second. Even today, it is not something that can be surpassed by wireless systems. But the kind of flexibility that a wireless network provides, right, in terms of portability, in terms of ubiquitous availability, in terms of the ease with which you can immediately provide a connection without having to lay cables, without having to, right, have end infrastructure available everywhere. So that is the, I would say, attractiveness of wireless networks, right? So in many communities, right, as end use, we would rather use a wireless device, okay, in particular Wi-Fi, rather than connect an Ethernet cable to our laptop or a mobile, right? But there are fundamental problems with wireless networks. What is the problem? Number one, the wireless communication is using a shared channel. So what I mean by shared channel, communication system like wireless is, okay, is transmitted over the air, right, over the atmosphere, okay, and that is actually received by everyone. So how do you make sure that what you send on the wireless link, okay, goes only to that particular entity or a person or a device that you intend to, and not to somebody else, right? That is a challenge. So a lot of innovations have happened to kind of not only make sure that the communication happens, it also to make sure that it actually reaches the intended recipient. It also ensures that you are not getting disturbed by somebody else's conversation. So all those things involve a lot of computation, a lot of signal processing, and a lot of innovations in the fundamental networking protocol themselves. So that evolution is what we are going to see in this talk. Okay. So today, communication over wireless networks have actually kind of evolved into a stage where the speeds that are provided are actually very, very close, if not exceeding that of wireline networks, right? For those who actually remember their very early days, you had what is called as DSL networks, which are actually copper networks, which were using telephone lines to provide high-speed data to homes. Now, all that is changed. Now we have fiber, and from fiber, we have wireless to connect to the end users. So wireless is something that is an enabling technology, which actually is an integral part of any communication computer network. Okay. So how is it that we are actually providing the wireless connectivity? There is a central infrastructure that is available, okay, which will be the one that is going to talk to all the devices that are there at different locations, which are being used by the end users, right? So if you have an analogy to what you call a Wi-Fi network, right? At home, we all have a Wi-Fi router or a modem, right? So that Wi-Fi router is going to connect to a wired network in most cases, right? There will be either an Ethernet link or a fiber link. The other option is to actually have even a wireless link from the office or the home, okay, to a central infrastructure. And that is what is the function of, I would say, a cellular or a mobile network. See, today, the cellular or mobile network has got transformed from being a provider of voice services to a provider of data services. So you have a central infrastructure, which is what is called as a point to multi-point infrastructure, right? So that central point is able to communicate simultaneously, as you see from the figure here, to multiple endpoints. Okay, they can be actually at home, they can be at an enterprise, they can be actually another network. So all of them, okay, are being centralized at that particular location, and then that carries the aggregated traffic to the backhaul. Okay, and there are many innovations that have happened. There's something called point-to-point backhaul, which has happened. We will discuss that further in detail. So typically, this is one aspect of how the wireless communication actually has been deployed. One other example at the home is using what is called LTE or WiMAX. I'll come to that later. Many people will be familiar with LTE, not so much about WiMAX. We will cover these things. These are technologies that have evolved from the basic need, the data needs to be actually communicated wirelessly. Okay. There are different types of end user terminals or platforms, right? All finally do the same thing, except that they have different capabilities. So you have fixed devices, you have portable devices, you have mobile devices, but the fundamental necessity of all of them is that they should be able to transmit and receive high-speed data. Now, we will look at what are the technologies that have made this possible. So that's where our interest is, right? So how has wireless network evolved over time, and what are the specific innovations that have happened that have enabled wireless networks to come to this stage, and what we can foresee in the future. Okay. Before talking about wireless networks, let me give you the link between wireless networks and in general computer networks, right? As you would have known, as you're all faculty in different departments, right? Computer networking is basically found on the premise of the OSI model, where you have different layers performing different functions, all with the intention of making sure that you are able to transfer data from one endpoint to another endpoint, right? So that is a fundamental premise that has actually made the computer networking domain evolve over time. And one of the principles that is used is what is called as packet switching. So every piece of communication, right, every piece of data is being sent in terms of packets. So this is how computer networks have evolved. Now, in parallel, the telecom network also evolved, right? If you see the history of telecom networks, the initial motivation for telecom networks was to carry voice. So voice was actually enabled in such a way that whenever there is a need for somebody to talk to another person, right, you will get what is called as a circuit switched connection. So the connection will be available for that duration, and then the person was able to communicate. And after that talk is completed, the circuit will be broken. Whereas computer networking, right, there is no such concept of circuit switching. All we need to do is to send data in terms of packets. So how many packets are you able to send? How fast are you able to send that packet? How large is that packet? Okay, that is what computer networking was talking about. And somewhere along the line, it was important for the telecom network also to adopt this packet switched approach. So a lot of standardization bodies came up, okay, and then defined networking standards based on how we can transfer packet data over the telecom network, right? So the motivation of doing that is that the telecom network should be the carrier of data, right? Because we need to connect computers, we need to connect devices everywhere, and then we need to make sure that packetized data has to flow through the telecom network. So there are multiple standards group. One group is called as 3GPP. So 3GPP is a group which was formed when the transition from the second generation telecom network to third generation telecom network happened. So we will see about that a little bit later. And in parallel, IEEE, which was actually the proponent of computer networking, right, also actually evolved standards for wireless communications, both for the end communication, which is called as a LAN communication, and for wide area communication, right, long distance communications. Okay, there was another group called 3GPP2, which was also very, very popular for some time. Now it's not so popular. And all the focus of these groups was to shift the telecom network towards a packet-oriented and multi-service. So it is a packet-oriented system, but we don't really care about what kind of service being offered, right? Today, everything is a packet. So over that, you can carry multiple services. Somebody can actually offer voice over packets. Somebody can offer video over packet. Somebody can just offer high speed, okay, some FTP over packet. It doesn't really matter as long as the underlying transfer is packet. Okay. Another aspect, okay, this is something that I wanted to actually emphasize in typical curricula, where the importance of standardization in any form of science or engineering. What has happened is that earlier different companies develop devices, right, for either it may be for computation, whether it may be for communication or otherwise, right? They had their own way of developing the systems, right? If you take an analogy, a few years back or a few tens of years back, Sony would actually come out with, let's say, a Walkman or a camcorder. The interfaces that Sony would have on the camcorder would be actually specifically designed for Sony. What I mean by that is the connectivity that it provides. It will require a specific type of cable. It will require that a Sony device on the other side should be connected to that. Only then it will communicate. Okay, that created a lot of problems because when you have more systems, again, another analogy is the regular computers, right? So you had earlier systems which are actually using a different type of connector for connecting to the mouse, a different type of connector to connect to the keyboard. Now we have all USB, which is used, right, for connectivity. And USB is used for multiple purposes. Why? Because USB has been standardized as a particular way of communicating, okay, which should be followed by every vendor, irrespective of the kind of device that he's making. So if you see this screen here, before the standards came into being, the service providers who are actually offering the service, right, were dependent on the devices from a particular manufacturer, let's say, right? Once they have bought an equipment from a particular manufacturer, they need to continue to buy the equipment from that manufacturer only, because their equipment will not work with other manufacturers for communication. Whereas standardization, what it actually ensures is that you can buy one network from one manufacturer, another system from another manufacturer, another end device from another manufacturer, and you can mandate that they all need to communicate with each other. Okay, so which means the protocol that is to be used in each of them have to be similar, and somebody has to ensure that they use the protocol that is compatible with all of them. So that is where standardization comes in. This is something that I feel should be part of the curriculum, where we need to create awareness among students as well as to how standardization came about, what are the different standardization bodies, and what are the standards themselves. So it is going to be extremely useful if some analysis, okay, of the different standards and even a description of the different standards that are available. So most standards are actually open standards, which means that the specification of those standards are available online and it can be downloaded by anybody and then seen, right? One example I can give as an analogy to computer networking is the RFCs, right? Request for comments. So computer networking itself evolved as a compilation of all these requests for comments, right? These requests for comments for each and every specific protocol. Let it be FTP, let it be HTTP, let it be your XML, JSON, whatever be the technology that is there. All of them were actually created by generating what is called as request for comments. And a certain innovator would somewhere write down the way that the protocol operates, and then he circulates to a group of people who then study that, make changes to that, and then somebody else ratifies saying, yes, this is something that can be used, and that is published. So that is how the standardization evolved. The similar thing happened in telecom as well. As I told you, the different bodies like 3GPP or IEEE started generating standards for wireless technologies for making sure that higher and higher data rates are able to be generated through these networks. Okay. So now I will just give you a history of how the cellular standard, okay, cellular network, the wireless cellular network started evolving to provide the high data rates. So if you remember, even still today being used, right, we have what is called as a GSM standard, which is the basic cellular telephony standard, right? So if you see in the picture here, the leftmost on top is the standard called GSM. That was hugely popular. That was the first standard that was used for telephony. Again, the focus was voice telephony, but the providing voice telephony over wireless, right? And that hugely revolutionized. So if you see in the 1990s and 2000s, GSM standard was the big revolution that happened, which made phones available to everybody, wireless phones available to everybody. So before that, it was all wired telephone, and there is no concept of a telephone per person, right? It was a telephone per household or multiple telephones in an office. So personalization of a communication device itself happened after GSM came into being. But very soon, the requirement for data over such a wireless network, okay, took over. So GSM was transformed into what is called as 2G data. Okay, that is what is technically termed as UMTS. Okay, Universal Mobile Telecommunication System, that evolved into what is called as HSPA, or high speed packet access. Okay, and there was further evolution into what is called as packet system, evolved packet system, and that has morphed into 4G and now into 5G, going forward in research 6G. So we will talk about these things a little bit in detail. In parallel to this, okay, there was one more technology which is also very, very promising, which also was initially for voice, but then transformed to provide data services, what is called a CDMA standard. Some of you might know about it. In India, CDMA was offered initially by Reliance, but after that they have switched over. This is no longer being offered, but this was also promising technology. So there was something called a CDMA 2000 technology, and then it evolved into what is called as EVDO to provide data, and something called ultra mobile broadband. And it transitioned into 4G, but it did not succeed. So it is a GSM system which evolved into 4G that succeeded, and that has succeeded now, and that is getting evolved into 5G. In parallel to both of these, IEEE, which is a standard organization which had a computer networking background, not a telecom background, right? So IEEE is actually famous for all the Wi-Fi, right? Whatever you see and use today as Wi-Fi is a standard called as IEEE 802.11, right? That also came up with a cellular standard, what is called IEEE 802.16e and 16m. This is what is called as WiMAX. That also actually was popular for some time, and now everything has been taken over by 4G, and which is actually a GSM evolution. So we will see that in a couple of slides. So I'll be actually projecting this to bring home the point that there has been an evolution of computer networking for wireless, for providing higher data rates, okay, which has used the cellular telecom network as the basis to grow. So if you see again the motivation for these different technologies, initially for converting the GSM network, which was a voice only network, to a data network, the motivation was to provide simultaneous circuit switched data as well as packet switched, circuit switched voice as well as packet switched data, okay, and also to increase the data rate that were available. Subsequently, it was all about increasing the data rates, right? And somewhere along the line, all the data became IP based, right? Why? Because computer networking evolved, right, with the fundamental premise that all data is packetized and all data is IP based, right? Internet protocol based, right? And IP has actually started to be the de facto standard to be used for any data communication. So today, whatever data that you communicate, right, whether it will be voice, video, any type of usage, everything finally is being transported over a packet, which is an IP packet. What I mean by an IP packet, which everybody knows, right? It's basically data encapsulated by an IP header, which consists of the destination and server and the source address, right? So every device is an IP device. So there will be an IP address assigned to that, and you're going to communicate to that particular address, right? So that migration to all IP happened in the telecom network, okay, around 2010, where every data communication was IP. And fundamentally, that has remained, and that will continue to remain in the foreseeable future. Then the focus for 4G was to increase spectral efficiency. So I'll tell you what spectral efficiency is from a wireless point of view subsequently. It is basically to do with how efficiently we are able to use the wireless channel. How can we squeeze more data through the same channel? Okay. This is another way of looking at this evolution. What we call second generation of telecom network is this GSM and its evolution to provide data. So that is what is our 2G system, right? So the term 2G mainly means that when compared to the previous telephone network, right, this was the next generation of communication system, which was providing wireless data, ubiquitous data. You can actually use, okay, with a handset and provide universal coverage with this kind of a system. So the focus was on voice, but data also was possible on this system. So that is a definition of the second generation system. Then the third generation system is to do with more data rate and transitioning into packet-based data. So another important thing that happened from second generation to and third generation is change from circuit switched data to packet switched data. So that is where all the 3G right networks came in. So today using 3G, yes, you can access data. Okay, you can also have voice, but then there was a tight integration between the way voice is provided and the way data is provided. Right, there was a circuit switched element which was present in that always. From third generation to fourth generation, that is where technologies like LTE or LTE advanced came into being. The network started becoming completely IP based, completely packet based. So that is when what you call a convergence between computer networking and communication systems happened. Okay, and that is truly what we will actually spend a lot of time on, understanding the technologies that have enabled such a transformation. Okay. So this is the path, the top arrow that you see here is the path that was standardized by the organization called 3GPP, Third Generation Partnership Project. The reason why it is called Third Generation Partnership Project and not second generation is because this particular group started working when the system that was there available was the second generation system. They wanted to create a third generation system. So they called the group as Third Generation Partnership Project. Okay, and that name has stuck till now. So they have not changed the name, though we have now transitioned into 4G, we are transitioning into 5G as well. So there is no, that is the significance of that. There's nothing else. Okay. So in parallel to that, if you see the middle arrow, as I told you, IEEE started creating standards for a parallel network, okay, a different kind of network using a technology called WiMAX. WiMAX was actually a very, very mature technology. It was actually giving a lot of, it was actually incorporating a lot of new features. Those features were very, very innovative, but they could not succeed beyond a point because the evolution of any technology, okay, not just depends on the kind of innovation that happens. It also depends upon how people actually absorb that innovation, in the sense whether they are ready to actually take that plunge, the change. Moreover, they don't want things to change completely. They don't want to actually put a new system. They want an existing system to be better and slowly evolve and change into something that is okay, new or providing a new service. So that is what actually 3GPP succeeded in providing. Okay, they made sure that the standard, the 2G standard, is kind of changeable. Okay, by changing some small components into 3G, then changing other components into 4G. Okay, so that is what made 3GPP successful, whereas IEEE actually failed. Same is the case with another standard body called 3GPP2, which was famously using what the technology called CDMA. We will see that a little bit what CDMA is. Okay, and then go ahead. I would like to stop at this time to kind of get your feedback on whether you have any questions to ask. Am I going a little bit fast? Am I going okay? The whole idea is to actually provide you as much information as possible in a field that you might not be very, on a day-to-day basis, may not be exposed to, but actually makes a lot of sense when you look at it from a networking point of view. So do we have any questions at this point of time?
Participants, you have any doubt, kindly ask, unmute yourself, then ask.
Okay, I can see that there are 58 participants. So please feel free to ask any question. Okay, whether this is something that is useful to you, not useful to you, be it whatever at a fundamental level as well. Because wireless seems to be a topic that seems to be alien to many people. So this is one attempt to kind of give you a perspective of, okay, how the wireless network actually is a very, very important part of the communication and computing I would say, ecosystem.
Networking is a syllabus-oriented subject only, sir. We are session is very informative.
Okay, okay. So can I assume that some of these topics are already known to the participants?
We have a syllabus in networking, sir.
Okay.
Data communication and
Networking,
network.
but not in particularly wireless networks. Am I right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. So people who have actually studied wire and are teaching networking, right, can definitely relate to this. There are aspects which are not actually very clear. Okay, in when it comes to wireless networking. So this is an attempt to actually make sure that that gap is bridged. Okay, so let me proceed ahead.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Just a little bit more information on what IEEE has done in terms of wireless standards. Okay. So you have different, this is something that I think you would have studied in as part of computer networking, particularly with respect to wireless networking, because IEEE focus is there as part of computer networking. So you have what is called personal area network. So example of that is Bluetooth or Hyperpan, which is not being used nowadays. Bluetooth, of course, has morphed into different varieties of Bluetooth used for different end communications, right? Going ahead, for communicating between different devices over a slightly longer distance, we have these LAN technologies, right? And a hugely popular Wi-Fi standard, okay, which is now entering into Wi-Fi 6 and Wi-Fi 7 standards. Again, I'm not going to talk about in detail about Wi-Fi in this course. I'm just going to just touch upon these things, saying IEEE has evolved these standards, okay, with computer networking as the core background, okay, in all these standards. So there are what is called Hyperman metropolitan area networking systems. Again, it was not successful. When I say successful, there are many different devices made, but then they did not make a global impact. I mean, we are not actually seeing that being used everywhere. What has become globally successful is the LAN standard from IEEE. And the MAN standard, one of which was deployed, is 802.16, which is also called as WiMAX, but that has also now started to die down. There was a big effort started to increase the data rate and the coverage much further using what is called 802.20 standard. That has also not actually succeeded. So this is primarily driven by IEEE. So that is one message that I would like to actually give. See, there will be a lot of research activity that will be happening in association with these standards bodies, with industry, with academia. Doesn't mean that all of that research is going to actually end up in commercially successful products. But the technologies that are getting developed as part of this research, they actually end up getting used in successful projects. So what makes those technologies successful is the amount by which those technologies are actually usable, okay, evolvable into from existing products into the future products. So that is one aspect that I think we should try to imbibe into students as well, saying that we will do a lot of research, both fundamental research as well as applied research, and not all of them will actually end up into successful products rather. But the fundamental technologies that are involved will always hold good. And that is why it is important to actually understand from first principles, understand the basic technology behind it. So this particular talk is also about the fundamental technologies behind, so that you have the appreciation of, right, what was done differently. So one of the successful standards from IEEE was what is called WiMAX. It is a global standard for wireless broadband access. Again, the term broadband I'm using because we are actually transferring data over a wireless network, right? And broadband means that we are transferring large amount of data. So the definition of broadband itself has changed over time. Earlier it was a few kilobits per second, few hundreds of kilobits per second. Now it is a few megabits per second and or gigabits per second. So the objective of IEEE in generating a standard is to create a network, a wireless network, which is similar to a DSL network or a digital subscriber line network or a cable network, right? Or a wired line kind of a performance over a wireless network. And this was designed from the ground up. When I mean ground up, from the basic fundamental principles. Okay, all the parts of the standard are developed by IEEE, meant to be used for long range outdoor systems, right? Connectivity wirelessly through that, high throughput, non-line of sight propagation. What I mean by that is that the receiver and the transmitter, right, are not actually having a direct connection, a direct line of sight. Line of sight is a straight line connection. There will be obstructions in between. There will be blockages in between. So in spite of that, the system should continue to work. Okay. And scalability to thousands of users. So it is not just connectivity between one user and another user. It is actually connectivity to thousands of users. So this is basically, if you see, you can see the similarity of this with the modern cellular system. So today you have actually a cellular system which is connecting to millions of subscribers, right? Of course, that requires a large infrastructure, but a single transmitter will be able to communicate with thousands of end users. Okay, of course, with a certain quality of service, right? So a minimum data rate guarantee to a particular user, all those things have to be ensured. Now, one important aspect, okay, again, this is kind of a deviation from the core computer science aspect, but then that is important because wireless is a shared medium, right? Anybody can use it. So there is a restriction that needs to be put as to who should use it. Now, wireless system can transmit in different frequencies. Okay. So what happened is government started to regulate the use of those frequencies. So who can use which frequency? So that itself became actually what is called as an intellectual, not a capital. Okay. So just like any other mineral, any other resource that a government has, a country has, right? Spectrum, that is the frequency of operation, also became a resource which needed to be kind of sold to operators so that nobody else uses that frequency. Why? Because if somebody else is going to use the same frequency, we are going to get affected, right? Just like how multiple people shout in a particular room, right? Nobody will be able to listen to anybody, right? You will have the same problem in wireless networks also. When wirelessly signals are getting transmitted, you wouldn't want other guys to come and disturb you, right? So there is something called as a licensed spectrum. This is again something that is fundamental. Everybody will know that, right? Operators will actually buy a certain chunk of spectrum. Spectrum meaning a bunch of frequencies. That is what is spectrum, right? That is called as a licensed spectrum. When they buy it from the government, it's a licensed spectrum. But to make sure that wireless networking propagates and everybody starts using it, governments worldwide also decided that certain frequencies, anybody can transmit, anybody can receive. Okay, nobody should actually put a restriction on that. So that is called license exempt spectrum or unlicensed spectrum. So as you know today, the Wi-Fi frequencies, there are two frequencies that are defined, or two bands of frequencies, two frequency spectrum. One is in what is called 2.4 gigahertz spectrum, and other one is called in what is called 5 gigahertz spectrum. Both these spectrums are unlicensed spectrum. That is, nobody can claim ownership of that. Anybody can transmit, anybody can receive. And that is what is being used by all our Wi-Fi devices, right? But for you to provide a certain quality of service, for you to guarantee that a particular user should have a certain data rate, and the data rate should not go down normally under normal circumstances, right? You should actually make sure that the frequency that is being used is licensed. So for people who are following the telecom domain, you will know that Airtel would have bought spectrum from the government. So they will have dedicated frequencies on which they transmit and receive. And for example, Vodafone may transmit and receive on a different frequency. Reliance may transmit and receive on different frequencies, right? So they have licensed spectrum available, but then for all their users, for all Airtel users, they will use the same frequency. For all Reliance users, they will use the same, but different from what Airtel uses. So that is how the government is able to make sure that at least between operators, there is no interference in terms of making service. But there is still that challenge, a technical challenge of making sure that when thousands of users, thousands of Airtel users, let's say, communicate, how are they communicating without disturbing each other? So I have 10 people or 100 people in a room talking over their cell phones. So how are they able to talk, right, using the same spectrum? Airtel has one spectrum, let's say, right? So that is the technology that has evolved over time, and some aspects of that is what we will actually also see now. Okay. So Wi-Fi and WiMAX were supposed to be complementary. Okay, what in the vision of IEEE, Wi-Fi was supposed to be used by end devices, like final connectivity to the end device, and this is how it is being used today as well, right? So the final connectivity to your mobile when you are at home, okay, you are going to connect through Wi-Fi, right? But then, how is that? What is the other endpoint to which that Wi-Fi device connects to? It will be a router, right? Or it will be some other device, right? That device in turn has to get connected to the internet. So how does it get connected today? It is connected either through Ethernet link or through a fiber optic link, or in IEEE's vision, it will connect to a WiMAX link. So you will have WiMAX for the what is called as the radio access, and then Wi-Fi for the end use connectivity. So the technical name for WiMAX is 822.16 and technical name for Wi-Fi is 802.11. There are different standards that are there. Okay, 802.11 AC, AX, similarly 802.16E, 16M. So this is one way by which the standards developed. Now the other evolution of the standard into 4G is by 3GPP, as we saw. So that actually started with what is called GSM, right, which is a 2G standard, evolved into WCDMA, which is a 3G standard. HSPA is an evolution of 3G standard, right? And in parallel, again, China was actually trying to get ahead into the game of high-speed data rate over wireless. So they developed a standard called as TD-SCDMA. Again, it is based on the standard called CDMA standard. Okay, that evolved into HSPA TDD, and that finally evolved into the LTE standard. Okay, and LTE has become hugely popular because of many reasons, and that one of the main reasons is several technical, I would say, revolutions that happened, innovations that happened, which made the LTE standard extremely high speed when compared to any of the previous standards. So that we will actually see now. The main thing that happened in LTE is that it is an all IP network, a completely new infrastructure, but still interoperable. That is still backward compatible with the 3G networks. That is what made it attractive, right? People need not switch, okay, because you have an LTE system doesn't mean that you have to actually dump all your 3G phones and then go to only 4G. The same 3G, 4G phone will be able to communicate to a 3G network also. It will be able to communicate to a 2G network also. So that is the attractiveness that the LTE system brought in. By the way, LTE is the technology being used for fourth generation wireless systems. Okay, so LTE and 4G sometimes are interchangeably used. Okay, both mean the same thing. Why? Because though fourth generation is a very, very generic term, fourth generation can be any other technology as well, but LTE has so dominated that 4G has come to mean LTE only. it also was able to address certain other developments in the data requirement, right? So now we not only wanted large amounts of data, we also wanted the data to come as fast as we want, right? That is basically what we mean by latency. Latency is nothing but the delay between successive reception of data or transmission of data. And more importantly, we wanted a certain amount of service, quality in the service, quality of service. That's what is QoS, right? What do we mean by quality of service? We wanted the errors in the system to be minimal. We don't want any packets to be lost. Okay, so those are the basic definitions of QoS. Most importantly, it was actually a mixture of a lot of innovations that happened in this period, 1995 to 2010, okay, which were initially in the research in main academic institutions that this research happened. And some of these technologies were so powerful that they actually completely changed the landscape of wireless. Before LTE came, okay, it was very difficult to compare a wireless system in terms of data rate with a wireline system. Wireline system was far ahead in terms of the data rate that it could offer. So people never really looked at wireless network as a network that could be the basis for a data network. Okay. After LTE, all the thing changed. So the boundary between okay a wireline network and a wireless network kind of started blurring. Okay. So this has become the dominant standard. LTE is the one that is actually now evolving into 5G as well. LTE is the one that is now evolving into 6G as well. Okay, so the WiMAX standard that we talked about and the CDMA standard that we talked about, which was actually the UWB, all those things were not something that were successful. Okay. Now, a little bit about how the different blocks of a telecom network are. This may be, I would like to skip it, go a little bit faster and then skip it because this will contain a little bit more details about the different blocks. If required, we'll actually come back to it later, right? So you had for the 2G system, the GSM system, you had an access system and then there's a circuit switched component, which was finally connecting to the regular telephone network, what is called PSTN, right? PSTN is the telephone network. Now, what happened in 2G when the data requirement also came, there was a packet switched block that was added, right? And that packet switched block is what was carrying IP data. So there were two interfaces from this 2G system, right, which was carrying packet also, right? One interface is to the regular telephone network, the other interface to the IP network, and that into the computer networks, right, into the internet. The 3G system also evolved in the same way, except that they decided that it is also possible to carry voice as a packet system. So the technology actually evolved to include one more component called IMS. That what it did is it had a way by which it could communicate either with the telephone network or with the IP network, and it started providing what is called as packet switched data. Okay. So today what we are familiar with what is called VoLTE, right? Voice over LTE. So this was actually voice over 3G. Voice over 3G was provided in two ways. One is through a regular circuit switch connection, also through a packet switch connection. As I told you, for 4G, for LTE, that whole paradigm changed. There is no circuit switched block. Everything is a packet system, right? Whether it is voice, video, data, anything is a packet system. So that has changed, and that IMS, okay, has started to be the bridge between the legacy system, which is the telephone network, and also the newer systems, which is the internet network, right? So this just gives you an idea of how the telecom network started evolving to accommodate data transfer, data, and providing data, and then slowly dominating, right, and becoming the main, I would say, communication network for carrying data. Now, how is it evolving? So today we have a 4G system, right? And how that 4G system has evolved and what is it evolved to, right? Uh, Again, there are different things that are here. There are too much information here. The 3GPP standard defines the LTE system, okay, in terms of what is called releases. So each release is a set of protocols and standards, okay, that define how the system should be operating. Okay, so the first definition of LTE was in what is called release 8. So that's what you see at the bottom end of this graph, right? Release 8, release 9. That is the definition of LTE initially, right? And it evolved into LTE advanced, okay, which is in terms of 3GPP standardization, it is release 10 and release 11, okay, where specific enhancements were made to the system architecture, okay. We will not be able to go into everything at this, but then I will be only covering key innovations that actually help this. Then it actually evolved further into pre-5G. When I say pre-5G, right, some of the components of a 5th generation system also came into being. Now, how does one define, okay, a system is a 3rd generation or a 4th generation? There should be fundamentally something that is, okay, revolutionary or changing in the way the service is being offered. Okay, so that change can be either in dramatically increasing the data rate, dramatically reducing the latency, right? Dramatically, okay, improving the end QoS. So those are the things that actually define as particular generation. So from pre-5G, okay, it has evolved into 5th generation system. So from an architecture perspective, okay, I will give you an idea of this, which is there in the figure on the right. So you had an infrastructure, okay, box called IT. That is, when you say IT, it is actually infrastructure, IT infrastructure, computer networking infrastructure, right, which is generating the data or connecting to the computer network somewhere in the world, right? That is going to connect to what is called as a BBU hardware, a baseband unit. Okay, a baseband unit is basically the unit that actually implements the LTE protocol, the 4G protocol, right? When I mean protocol, again in computer networking parlance, right? You have a physical layer, you have a medium access layer, you have a data link layer, you have a networking layer, you have session layer, right? All those protocols will be running on the BBU hardware. Now, why do these protocols are required? That for a wired network, for any computer networking, you will know, right, how physical layer takes care of how physically the signals are getting transmitted, right? The data link makes sure that you have a link established between 2 endpoints. The session layer makes sure that, okay, there is over this data link, there can be multiple sessions, each carrying different type of traffic. So those kind of things. A similar way has to be evolved for the wireless network also. Okay. And wireless network has a little bit more focus on the lower layers, that is the physical layer and the medium access and the data link layers. Why? Because it is a shared medium, right? You have to actually finally transmit on air. So when you transmit on air in a shared medium and you have to transmit to multiple users, right? You have to follow a certain way by which multiple users can use that, right? Without disturbing others. So there are protocols involved, more involved in a wireless computer network than a regular wired computer network. And finally, the radios, right? Radios are the ones which actually take the signal, the data, right? And then make sure that it is transmitted on the higher frequency, okay, which is suitable for going to longer distances, right? So again, we will not be discussing in detail about radios in this particular talk. Okay, that itself is a big topic. So I'm just focusing on the architecture and the protocols. Now, how it has evolved, the same evolution that computer networking also has gone through, right? Now, what has happened is instead of using standard devices like routers or switches, right? The whole computer networking is actually moving towards what is called virtualized infrastructure, right? You use a standard server, the standard server is going to act as a switch or a router or whatever function you want it to do, right? So a similar way, the 4G network also is evolving towards virtualized infrastructure. So you have a core network, okay, which will be the central network to which all the 4G systems or the 5G systems will connect to. That will be running on a server. We call it a packet core or the enhanced packet core or EPC in this diagram, right? That itself becomes virtualized. Okay, that will be sitting somewhere in the cloud. Even the BBU hardware, that is one part of the one system that actually is running all the wireless protocols. That also will be running in the cloud. Only thing that will be running at the edge, right? Just at the time of the place where it is going to actually transmit on air. That is the radios, right? So the radios are the ones which are going to be present at the end point, right? So what you see today, you have towers everywhere, right? So what is on these towers? All these towers have these radios. Okay, there's a different name given to these radios. It is called as RRH or remote radio head, RRU or remote radio unit. Okay, it is basically radios. Those radios today are talking to dedicated BBU hardware, which are actually just at the base of the tower or somewhere inside a building very nearby. That is now getting evolved into, okay, that particular BBU itself is implemented on a virtual platform that will be running somewhere in the cloud. Okay, so this is further getting evolved into different types of radios for 5G. Okay, so if the time permits, I can talk about that, but not sure whether there'll be enough time to discuss more about 5G. So I will focus on 4G and the innovations, and then just talk a little bit of 5G if there is a time. So there are different concepts that are there in 5G which are different from 4G. So 4G itself is actually a revolution. 5G is actually an enhancement to 4G. Okay, just a quick look at the data rates, right? We say the 2G, 3G, 4G. Okay, what kind of data rates are possible? So the first generation system, okay, were primarily analog systems. Okay, analog systems meaning that they were actually continuous transmissions. So the kind of data rates are, right, very, very small compared to today's standards, right? 14.4 kilobits per second. Okay, peak was what was possible. When we had this 2G system and we had our GSM connection, okay, it started with 9.6 kilobits per second, but then it evolved into 2.5G, where some around 20 to 50 kilobits per second was possible, right? And this was a revolution. Even this was actually a revolutionary thing, because now on their cell phones, people were actually able to get data, right? They were able to connect to internet. They were able to browse, right? They were able to do basic connectivity. So that itself was a revolution. 2.5G itself was a revolution. Third generation, okay, if you see, kind of made the data rate in megabits per second, right? So this is actually, that is the reason why it is a next generation, right? The data rate that was available, right, increased from a few tens of kilobits per second to megabits per second. That's an order of, right, 100 increase in the data rate that was possible. So this further evolved, okay, and hundreds of megabits per second are possible in 4G. So again, if you see, typically this is the kind of trend, right? Whenever there is an order of 100 in the data rates that are possible, you kind of say that it's a different generation of technology, right? So that is a ballpark understanding of different technologies. 2G, a 3G system is 100 times, right, faster than a 2G system in terms of data rate. 4G system is 100 times faster than 3G in terms of data rate. A similar benchmark is kept for 5G also, that it should actually be 100 times faster, right? 100 times faster than 100 megabits per second is 1 gigabits per second. So that is a ballpark, okay, understanding of how the generations of wireless technologies are developed. Okay, so 5G is now getting deployed. We have started getting cell phones which have 5G capability, but then we don't have yet infrastructure that is ready for 5G, but it is coming very soon. So our Airtel already has some trial deployments of 5G. Reliance Jio is actually working at a 5G system. But 4G is something that is now almost ubiquitous. Everywhere it is available. Okay. Right. So we will go through and understand the LTE network in detail, and it is only slightly changing in 5G. Okay, nothing much is changing, but then the data rate capability and all that, there are differences. So it is very important to understand LTE system, okay, to kind of appreciate that. Right. So I will quickly go through this, what we have talked so far, right? Low latency, right? Reduce delay between packets, higher data rates, higher cell edge data rate. Okay. Again, when you are talking about a wireless system, okay, because it is on air, right? It is not that you will actually get the same everywhere. Is there a question? Can I continue?
Please, sir.
Yes, sir.
So the requirements for the 4G system were, right, to make sure that even at the edge of the cell, when I say cell, a cell is actually a notion of, right, area where the coverage is available, right, from a particular system. So when I said a radio is covering a particular area, right? The area that is being covered by a radio is called as a cell. So at the edge of the cell, meaning far away from the radio, right, you will actually have lesser signal strength, therefore lesser data rates. So even at the edge of the cell, right, how do you provide a slightly higher data rate? So those were actually the requirements of the LTE network. Okay. And simplified network architecture. Okay, this is something that in comparison with 3G network or a 2G network, the number of elements, the number of blocks that were involved became lesser. Okay. So I will skip the rest of it because it will be too much in terms of this. Yeah, in terms of performance, there was a major focus, right? The peak rates, the maximum rates that are possible, throughput rates, right? Data rates that are possible, that had to be increased. Cell throughput, right? Each cell, how much it can actually evacuate, and how efficiently we are using the spectrum, right? How much data rate we are going to get per megahertz, right? That also increased. Having the capability to provide voice over the same data network, so that was also important. Then how fast you are able to move with that particular cell. So there are innovations that make sure that the data is continuing even when you are moving fast. Okay. Broadcast mode performance. Okay, there are different standards defined for providing TV-like experience over the LTE network. Then there is a definition of a user plane and control plane. Again, this is from computer networking background, right? Today, computer networks are actually evolving to what is called as software-defined networking. And there is a definition of how you would want to actually have the control plane separated from the data plane. What do we mean by control plane? Right? How do you actually set up the connection? Right? How do you make sure that the devices are communicating with each other? What is user plane? User plane is the actual data, the flow of actual user data. So you would want to separate out both, okay, and then look at it separately. So there is a lot of effort going on in the computer networking fraternity to kind of make sure that these are two separate aspects of designing a network. Okay, same thing is happening in the wireless also. Okay. This is to give you a flavor of like what are the elements involved in a 4G network, an LTE network. Okay. At the left, you see what is called as a UE. UE is nothing but user device, which is your, okay, in simple terms, it's your mobile, right? The mobile is a UE. Mobile is the endpoint of the network. And then that connects over what is called as an LTE UU network, right? UU network is nothing but your wireless network, right? The connectivity, the black line that you see on the left to the system called eNode B, right? That is actually the wireless link. So if you see, wireless link actually is formed only between the E node B and the UE. Everything else is a computer network. So from the E node B, you will actually connect to what is called as the packet core. And that is a combination of multiple devices. Okay, in this, one is a HSS, MME, serving gateway, packet gateway, PCRF. We will not go into detail of that. I have slides for that, but I would like to skip that for the moment because that will be going into too much detail of what each one does. Just to get an overall picture, there will be thousands or hundreds of E node Bs which will get connected to this block, this combination of HSS, MME, serving gateway, packet gateway, and PCRF. So this together, this 5 element is together called as packet core. So this packet core will be centralized. So if you see Airtel, we have one centralized packet core somewhere sitting in Delhi or Bombay, right? And they will have connectivity from that to thousands of or 10,000s of E node Bs, which are there distributed everywhere. So this E node B is a combination of what I told you before, a baseband unit and a radio, right? So that is actually the definition of an E node B, a base station. So the other name for E node B is base station. Again, the term E node B is a technical term that came about because of historical reasons. The 3G network base station was called as node B. The 4G network base station is called as enhanced node B. So they just termed it as E node B. The 5G networks base station is called as G node B. Instead of E, they call it as G. So it is just a terminology that is used to kind of differentiate and distinguish between these different types of base stations. Right? So what we will be focusing on is on the wireless network, whereas if you see, a lot of other elements are involved in actually making sure that the network is operational. The link that you see on the right hand side towards the packet data network, right, that is coming from an element called packet gateway. This packet gateway is part of the packet core, right? That is the interface towards the network. When you say network, it is the internet, right? So you get connected to the internet through the packet gateway. So all the data coming from all the millions of UEs through thousands and 10,000s or 100,000s of E node Bs actually get collected at the EPC packet core, and then they are forwarded to the internet. So this is how the telecom network gets connected to the rest of the computer network in the world. Okay. Now, to make sure that everything works together, right, the elements in the telecom network, in this particular case, the 4G network or the LTE network, also have to operate as if they are part of the computer network. So what is one fundamental definition of any element in a computer network? Each element is an IP device, right? It has an IP address and you are going to access that IP address, right? Whether you are actually accessing a URL in a accessing a web page or accessing a server somewhere else, finally, you are actually addressing that in terms of IP. So in a very, very similar way, each of these elements, the E node B, the HSS, PCRF, MME, serving gateway, packet gateway, each one has a particular IP address that is defined. So everything is an IP device and the communication is over IP. So when I say communication is over IP, a lot of protocols are defined. Okay, there are different types of protocols, which are some suitable for telecom, some are common between computer networking. Okay, so different protocols are there. So again, going through all these protocols, I don't think I'll be able to finish it, okay, even in a day. But the fundamental idea is that. So this is kind of the convergence that has happened, right? The telecom network has kind of now transformed itself into an IP network. This was not the case earlier. This was not the case with 3G. This was not the case with 2G. Starting with 4G, starting with LTE is when this transformation happened. And that is when it has actually converged into a computer network. Okay, just like any other computer network. Okay. Of course, there are other things that are required in a telecom network, right? Because a telecom network is managed by an operator. So he has to make sure that everything is working fine. So you have what is called as a element management system, or the EMS. So if you see in the diagram here, you will have what is called as a RAN EMS, that is radio access network EMS. What is that? It is a management system which is able to manage all the base stations in the network. So that's why there is a red line that is connecting to the E node B, right? One EMS, one RAN EMS will be connecting to multiple E node Bs, and it will be able to monitor the performance, right? The day-to-day operations of all the base stations. So for an operator, that becomes very important, right? Because they have deployed all these systems. They need to see how those systems are performing, how much data rate they are actually consuming, okay, whether there is a problem with some base stations. So those things are done through this management system. Similarly, for managing all the central core elements, you will have what is called as an EPC EMS, which you see in the bottom, right? That is connected, and that will manage all these 5 elements, right? Why is an EPC management required? Because each and every subscriber, each and every mobile, right, has to be first registered with this packet core. So just to give you some insight into how okay, the computer network, the telecom networking actually has evolved, right? So every UE, you are actually given a SIM card, right? The values that are programmed in the SIM card, okay, are things like secret key, okay, the number of the subscriber, all those things are there in the SIM card. The same information has to be kept in the packet core. So this element called HSS is the one that actually holds the database. So this is called home subscriber station, HSS, that actually contains all the information of all the subscribers in that particular system. Okay. The E node B, or the base station, does not keep any information about the subscribers. It is only an element which is converting, right? Its main function is to make sure that the communication with multiple mobiles happen over the wireless interface. So once the packets are received at base station, they will be transparently sent to the packet core. And the packet core will check whether this particular mobile is authorized to use this data, okay, whether it should continue in the network. All those things are being centrally done. So this is basically how a telecom network, particularly a 4G network, operates. If you want to get a flavor of how the 5G network operates, it is very similar. Of course, you have a 5G mobile, right? The protocol that is being followed on the LTE UU interface, okay, that is getting changed. Why is it getting changed? Because we want to offer more data over the wireless network. So that protocol has to change. Because that protocol has to change, the E node B also has to change to what is called G node B. Beyond that, the functionality fairly remains the same, except that you actually bring in more virtualization, right? These elements, instead of actually running on dedicated hardware, they will be running on virtualized servers somewhere in the network. So that is the evolution that has happened. So one other aspect, okay, that started from 4G network is the separation of what is called control plane and data plane. Okay, these are logical connection. So if you see on the figure on the right, every mobile, when it is switched on, right, it actually makes a connection, a logical connection to the element in the packet core called MME. And once that connection is made, there is a data that is accessed through the user plane. So control plane is mainly for setting up a connection. So though we talk about a packet switched connection, okay, still UEs or the subscriber terminals or the mobiles have to actually establish a connection first. Okay, it's a virtual connection. I mean, there's no physical connectivity. Okay, a continuous connectivity. It is just a virtual connection. There is a notion that a particular mobile has entered into the network and it is now active. Right. That is what we mean by a connection. Okay. So the control plane and the user plane, if you see, are routed to different endpoints in the packet core. So the function of MME is to make sure that there is a logical connection established. The function of the gateway is to ensure that the user packet, user data that is getting generated is sent to the internet, and whatever is coming from the internet for that particular mobile is provided to that. Okay. Incidentally, if you see, even the mobile also is an IP device. So everything in the network has now become an IP device. So the IP address for the mobile is actually provided dynamically. Whenever the mobile connects to the network, it will be given an IP address. Okay, and that is the IP address with which you can access that mobile from anywhere in the world. So the core, I would like to skip this. The core part of it is something that we will not have time to look at. So I will only focus on the networking part and the radio access part, because that is what will be slightly interesting. That is what you will not be exposed to often. So if you see the data flow, so this is kind of giving you an idea of how the data flows in a 4G network, or for that matter even the 5G network, right? So you have the UE application, right? UE is a mobile device, right? You have applications on that, different apps that are there, right? That is going to talk to somewhere in the internet, some remote host, some server somewhere, right? That app it's going to talk to. Now, how is the data flowing, right? That app it's going to generate packets, right? IP packets, which are either TCP packets or UDP packets. So now we are getting into the networking layer, right? And the session layer, right? TCP or UDP, right? Over TCP or UDP, you will have different applications, different protocols running, right? You will have your FTP, you will have SNMP, whatever, right? Everything is TCP IP based or UDP IP based, right? So that packet is actually, right, coming to the IP layer, and beyond the IP layer, there are a set of protocols which are specific for the wireless interface. So the PDCP, RLC, MAC, and PHY that you see on the left bottom, right? These are fundamentally the protocols that are used for 4G wireless communication. And there will be a corresponding peer protocols that are running on the base station. So if you see the PDCP, RLC, MAC, and PHY, right? PHY is the definite in computer networking terms, right? PHY is actually the L1 layer, right? Physical layer. MAC is the medium access control layer. Okay, RLC is the radio link control. PDCP is packet, okay, data convergence protocol. So PDCP is again a fancy term, okay, to kind of say that that is the place where you will actually generate an IP packet or consume an IP packet. Beyond that, there is no notion of IP, okay, because beyond that, the focus is on how do we actually transport this packet, IP packet, over the wireless network. So all these four protocols, PDCP, RLC, MAC, and physical layer, these are the protocols that are defined by the standard, by the 4G standard. So when I said we had talked about release 8, release 9, release 10, release 11, right? All these standards will talk about these four protocols in detail. Okay. So once it passes through this protocol, it is just like any other computer network, right? Any other computer packet, IP packet, right? Once it comes into the base station, the packet that is being sent by the UE, right, comes out of the physical layer over the wireless interface, enters into the physical layer of the eNode B, comes up through the MAC layer, comes up through the RLC layer, PDCP layer, okay, and you have the IP packet that is coming out. This IP packet is once again encapsulated inside a GTP packet. GTP is again an encapsulation protocol, right? And then it is actually again encapsulated into another UDP and IP. So it is kind of IP within an IP, right? That is being sent to the packet core, right? At the packet core, that encapsulated IP is removed, the UDP is removed, the GTP is removed. So you will have the IP packet as it was generated from the mobile, right? That IP packet is like any other IP packet. The EPC is like a router, right? It's going to forward that packet okay, as if it is being forwarded to any other computer network, right? It will be routed to the corresponding host to which this is assigned. So this is how the communication happens. So this slide, okay, I think is one of the most useful slides to kind of get the visualization of how an IP communication happens in a wireless network. Okay. Of course, this is a highly simplified version, right? Each and every layer, the physical layer, the MAC layer, the RLC and PDCP themselves are actually very, very complicated and very, very interesting layers. Okay, the focus is to make sure that on wireless network, you actually transport the data without errors, make sure everybody is able to talk to, okay, when communicate at the simultaneously at the same time. That is where all the innovations have happened. Okay, but fundamentally, this is what we are trying to achieve, right? So you can have multiple base stations, right? You see in this diagram, I just trying to kind of put the big picture, saying each and every base station here can also talk to the other base stations, and in turn it will talk to the packet core. The top two boxes, MMES gateway, is nothing but the packet core, right? Which is the MME is doing a control plane packet communication. S gateway is doing a data plane packet communication. So this is how the architecture actually is formed. Now, I'm going into a little bit detail on the RAN layer, that is the radio access layer, the four layers that we talked about, right? PDCP, RLC, MAC, and physical layer. Okay. Just to give you a flavor of that, because there are too many concepts to be understood, but I'm going to only highlight a few of them. Depending upon what is the bandwidth, okay, the data rate also varies. So what is meant by bandwidth? Bandwidth is actually a collection of frequencies. Like for example, Airtel today uses LTE in what is called band 40. Okay, band 40 is a band that is defined. It is a wireless band. It's a set of wireless frequencies. Okay, when I say wireless frequencies, there will be actually a very, very high frequency that will be used. Okay, for example, band 40 definition is 2.3 gigahertz. So only when you send it using such high frequency, it will actually travel a longer distance. Within the 2.4 gigahertz, you will have the Airtel system using, okay, a small chunk of that, okay, which is what is called bandwidth. Okay, either it can be 1.4 megahertz or 3 megahertz or 5 megahertz or 10 megahertz or 15 or 20. Okay, this is what is auctioned by the government and made sure that Airtel only uses. So Airtel is licensing, paying an amount to the government to license this 20 megahertz, let's say, of frequency, right? Using 20 megahertz, it can actually transmit, okay, up to 150 Mbps. That is a peak data rate that is possible, okay. And 300 Mbps if it uses some special subscriber terminals. Okay. We will again not go into too much of detail of this. This slide I've just kept to say that the wireless system is highly configurable, right? Depending upon what kind of bandwidth that you can have different data rates that are possible. Okay. So just to give a flavor, there are different bands defined by LTE. Okay, different countries use different frequencies. So if you see here, there is band number from 1 to 40. Actually, it's here. You're seeing only up to 25, right? Each one is a certain set of frequencies, which are auctioned, which are licensed, and then they are actually allocated to operators. So the radio has to be able to transmit in those frequencies. So that is the difference in a wireless network as against a wireline network. Okay, again, I would not want to spend too much time because there's too much of detail into going through this. I'll skip that. Okay. Even in the subscriber terminals, there's a vast difference in terms of the capabilities of a subscriber terminal. So the standard also defines what is called different categories of subscriber terminals, right? So a mobile subscriber or mobile terminal, right, can be a UE category 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now categories up to 20 are also defined. they all differ in terms of their data rate capability. Okay. Now, how they are able to differ in terms of data rate capabilities, how fast they're able to send data. For them to actually send data, there are different methodologies used. So we will cover those methodologies now. Now, the enabling technologies. So this is where I want to actually spend some time before I close. What is making LTE so different or so revolutionary? Right? So quick look at how on air we are able to access. Right? See, traditionally, wireless access was actually using what is called as TDMA, time division multiple access. That is, when you want to communicate with multiple terminals, multiple mobiles, right? You first transmit to one mobile, then next few seconds you transmit to another mobile, next few seconds you transmit data to another mobile, then come back to the first mobile. So this is in time, you are dividing it to time slots. Each slot you allocate to a particular user. So as you see in this example here, right, in slot C in time, you are going to communicate with mobile C, then B, then A, then again C, B, A. I mean, I'm assuming a simplistic scenario where only 3 mobiles are present. You can actually extrapolate it to hundreds of mobiles. So there'll be 100 slots. Each slot is allocated for a particular mobile. So this is a simple what is called TDMA. In time you are dividing. Similarly, there's a concept of dividing in frequency also. Okay, so you can divide that in frequency, and in different frequency chunks you can communicate with different mobiles. So this is how you actually achieve communication simultaneously with multiple mobiles, right? When you say each radio is capable of hundreds of mobiles, this is the way that they communicate. Okay. Then what I'm talking about, these methodologies are not to do with 4G. They're actually the traditional wireless communication methodologies, right? Either you divide it in time, divide it in frequency, or divide it in what is called code. Okay. This is what the CDMA systems use. There's a definition of code. Each mobile will have a different code, and these codes will be assigned to each mobile, and they will use that code to transmit and receive. And at the base station, at the radios, the codes can be separated out. Okay. This was a very, very new technology when it came, which was very useful technology, still being used by military, but not actually having much further use for commercial wireless. Okay. So this is another way of looking at it. Either you transmit and split the different time and allocate in different time, or allocate in different frequency, which is FDMA, or allocate different codes, okay, which is CDMA. What LTE did was slightly different. They used a combination of time and frequency to define what is called as resource blocks. Okay. Even before that, there was a concept of transmitting multiple bits per symbol. So each information is being transmitted in terms of symbols, okay, and each symbol can occupy 1 bit or 2 bit or 3 bits or 4 bits. Okay. So that evolution happened, which is called as QAM. So QAM is quadrature amplitude modulation. So modulation was one concept that is introduced in LTE, which actually allowed multiple bits to be transmitted per symbol. Okay. Then other technology was to actually schedule different users. Okay, we will talk about that quickly. Then there was a definition of what is called as a time interval. Okay, 1 millisecond period. In 1 millisecond, okay, you will actually have different sub slots you assign to different users. Okay. Then a lot of innovations happened in adapting the transmission to wireless conditions, right? See, wireless is actually a very, very harsh environment. So you can have interference from other users. You can have complete blockage. Suppose you have a thick forest in between, the signal will get totally blocked, right? It is dynamically changing. Tomorrow there is a building that is coming up, which was not there earlier. So till now you'll have a good signal, tomorrow you'll have a bad signal. So how do you adapt to that? Okay. And then most important of all, we had actually a revolution which took place in the way the communication happens between transmitter and receiver. So instead of using one antenna to communicate, okay, we can use actually multiple antennas to communicate between transmitter and receiver and make sure that the data rate is increased much higher. Then another concept traditionally being used in computer networking, right? The way of communicating and way by which we actually recover from errors using what is called automatic repeat requests, that there were some innovations that happened. So in a nutshell, okay, 6 or 7 different innovations that happened, which made LTE, okay, extremely, I would say, efficient, okay, very close to wireline speeds. First one is orthogonal frequency. So we talked about actually dividing in time and dividing in frequency, right? So by using orthogonal frequency division multiplexing, again, this is going into a key signal processing, which I don't want to get into in detail, but just to give you a flavor, okay, of what this technology is. This is a way by which you can actually divide the resources into a grid instead of only time and only frequency. So each block in that grid, if you see on the right bottom, right, you can see certain grids, certain blocks that are colored red, certain blocks that are colored violet, and certain are orange, and certain are green. So the red blocks are basically resource blocks. Okay, each red block can actually have, let's say, 4 bits or 6 bits. Okay, so you assign multiple such blocks to a particular subscriber terminal. So you can send, in this case, 5. There are 5 red blocks. So 5 into 4 or 5 into 6, 30 bits can be sent in 1 millisecond. Okay, so you can, in the next 1 millisecond, you can allocate different blocks to the red. So red is for particular subscriber terminal, for particular mobile. So you can allocate very dynamically how many bits you want to give in terms of data for a particular mobile. So this is how actually you kind of make sure that multiple mobiles are given data. Okay. So this is one revolution that happened, that you actually consider this as a resource grid rather than just a time slice or a frequency slice. Okay, that is made possible by a technology called OFDM modulation. Again, let's leave it at that. It is much more in detail, okay, when it comes to signal processing as to what is this. So this increased the spectrum efficiency. This actually, okay, made sure that more bits were transmitted over air. And instead of considering as slots, you are actually considering as discrete resource blocks. Okay, cyclic prefix is a technical enhancement that we will not cover right now. The other thing that happened is, because wireless is a very difficult medium, right? You may not get the data rate, okay, that you wished, but you will actually end up in errors if you're trying to cram multiple bits. So instead, what you do is, if the signal is very weak, then you only send a few bits. The signal is very good, you actually cramp in more bits. So that is what is being achieved by changing the modulation. So you adapt the modulation, okay, in terms of how good the channel is. So that way you will actually make sure that at least the minimal data rate is continuously flowing. So that is another innovation that happened in 4G, which was not there in the previous technologies. Then there's a concept of hybrid automatic repeat request. So automatic repeat request, I think those who have gone through computer networking course will understand there are different types of repeat request mechanisms, right? You have what is called stop and wait protocol, you have go back N protocol, you have different types of ways by which you signal to the transmitter that there was an error, and then it has to be retransmitted, right? Here, the innovation that happened was, let's say you receive a packet in error. In a traditional repeat request, you will actually discard the packet. So instead of discarding the packet, you hold on to the packet, and when the retransmission comes, you combine. So that way you can get a higher probability of making sure that the packet is okay. So this is something that was made available in 4G technologies. Then other thing that happened is, again, there is a lot of adaptation happening based on the signal strength. So you can combine what is called forward error correction. Okay, so there are a lot of error correction also happening. All these things are happening at the lower layers, right? At the physical layer, MAC layer, and the PDCP layer. So that is where the focus is on, because wireless technologies have focused on that area because that is the more critical area because the channel is wireless, right? Above that is all IP. So that is traditionally handled in a way how a computer network is handled. So innovations have happened in the lower layers so that you can increase the data rate. The other aspect that happened, okay, is what is called multiple antenna technology, or what we call MIMO. Some of you might have heard of it. It is a way by which you actually increase the data rate, okay, or make sure that the reception is very good by using multiple antennas. So each radio that we talked about, right, can have 4 antennas or 8 antennas or 16 antennas or 34 antennas. So that will actually increase the data rate. Okay, this is a real innovation in signal processing. Again, going into details will require a lot of time. So I'm just leaving it at that. So MIMO is one concept that actually has helped in increasing data rates. There are different types of MIMO: diversity, spatial, beamforming, etc. So these are the different techniques that were followed, okay, to make sure that 4G systems actually are very very close in terms of data rates, and they are kind of mimicking the wireline systems. So I would like to stop at this time, okay, because we are kind of nearing the end. So if there are any specific questions, I would answer, and then we can close.
Sir, one question in my side.
Yeah.
How volt work and any recent trends in this technology?
Can you repeat it? Can you repeat the question?
How volt, VOLT, volt work and any recent trends in this technology?
Okay. See, VoLTE is nothing but, okay, it is a way by which the voice network, okay, voice communication happens over the LTE network. I will go back to the previous slide. Just give me a second. Just give me a second. So if you see the slide, right, we had in 3G networks, okay, whenever there is a voice call that is happening, what will happen is that the system, the radio will actually switch over to a different network. The packet will actually go from the access. See the third picture in this 3G IMS evolution, right? Where the packet will actually go into what is called the circuit switched domain. And then it will connect to a regular telephone network. Okay. So this is something that happened, which was to kind of retain the legacy networking. There, whenever there is a call, okay, that call will be actually considered as a circuit switched connection. Whereas for VoLTE, for voice over LTE, okay, the call itself is considered as a packet. So it is not being distinguished as a voice call. It is just like a a packet, but a packet which has a particular requirement of quality of service. Okay. So in computer networking terms, each voice packet is encoded into what is called as a SIP protocol. There is something called a session initiation protocol. Okay. So it is a higher layer protocol. SIP in turn is actually communicating over IP. So over IP, it will be TCP, and over TCP, it will be SIP. Okay. So each packet is a SIP packet, and that comes to the IMS. In the fourth slide, if you see, fourth diagram, if you see, it's coming to IMS. The IMS is the one which strips off the SIP protocol, takes the voice data, and then gives it to the PSTN. Okay. Or if it is going to another phone, right, another 4G phone, it doesn't even go to the PSTN. It is directly going into the IP network. So through the computer network itself, the voice packet actually gets transferred. It doesn't even enter into the telecom network. So that way, if you have call between two handsets, okay, which both are 4G handsets, then there is no need for the telecom network, that is a PSTN network, to be involved. Directly, it is taken as a voice packet. Okay, so that is basically how the VoLTE works. Okay, there is no evolution in that. For 5G also, VoLTE will be the same. There's nothing much to be done about that, because VoLTE is a legacy service that needs to be offered.
Thank you, sir. A future of 5G technology in India and device compatibility, sir.
Right. So, see, today what is happening is the major difference in 5G and 4G is in the radio. Everything else beyond that is kind of very, very similar. So certain devices, so all technology manufacturers, big technology manufacturers like Qualcomm or MediaTek, so what they have done is they have made sure that their devices, their chipsets, okay, also incorporate both the 4G protocol as well as 5G protocol. So today a 5G handset will be able to communicate with a 4G base station or with a 5G base station. So the standard is actually done in such a way that there are different possibilities that are there. Like, for example, suppose, let's say you already have a full 4G network, right? You have all 4G base stations deployed everywhere. Now 5G base stations are starting to come, right? You can have a mobile which can connect to the 4G base station, right? But then the data that it is generating can go to the 5G base station, because the 5G base station can provide a higher data rate. It will get a better connection, and then it will actually communicate using the 5G. So it will use the 5G only for data, use the 4G only for control. When I mean control, to connect to the network. So that is what is called as dual connectivity operation. So that is the trend that it is going towards. So a lot of thought has gone into making sure that you don't totally abandon the 4G network when you go into 5G. But the more important fact is the subscriber terminals or the mobiles have to be compatible. So the focus is on mobiles. So that's why you also now are seeing that first the mobiles are available, right? 5G mobiles are available, whereas there are no 5G networks, right? Even though the mobile is 5G capable, it will still continue to work in 4G. As and when the 5G base stations come in, it will start communicating with 5G also, right? And the main difference in the 5G infrastructure, that is the base station, is the radio. So radio will be a new radio. Fundamental way of communication will still remain the same. Why is there a new radio? Because that new radio incorporates new protocols which increase the data rate. Okay, I was actually very, very briefly mentioning what is called as MCS, that is modulation and coding scheme, right? So there are different innovations that have happened in the modulation and coding scheme in 5G systems. Okay, I have not gone into detail of that. There are different types of ways by which you can actually enhance performance by employing very advanced version of forward error correction. So error correction is one area. Okay, that's a very, very intensive computer science topic, right? Error control coding. That is has improved leaps and bounds. So we have actually now error correction mechanisms which are very, very robust. That is what is being used in 5G systems. So we have what is called as polar codes that are used in 5G systems. So that is the evolution that the network is going towards. But as you said, the important one is actually the compatibility, right? So it is the end terminal that should be first compatible. So 5G phones that come today will be compatible to 4G systems also, and they will be able to also communicate over 5G networks.
Thank you, sir. One final question. What does CS fall back in LTE?
Okay. See, again, this is again to do with the compatibility. Okay. The expansion of CS fallback is circuit switched fallback. So you have a base station which can actually do only 4G. Okay, 4G voice, sorry, 4G data, right? So there are systems, there are packet core systems which do not connect to the PSTN network or the voice network at all. So those systems will not be able to give you voice service over 4G. They will only be able to give you data service. But then voice service is a fundamental requirement, right? Any mobile person who buys a mobile should be able to get voice service also, though data service has become important. Now, how do you provide voice service if the network itself does not support? So what happens is we also have our 2G networks and 3G networks already available in that area, right? So whenever a voice call is initiated by the mobile, okay, what the 4G network will do is it will temporarily ask the mobile to get removed from the 4G network and connect to the 2G network. Okay, once the voice call gets completed over the 2G network, the mobile will again connect back to 4G network. So this mechanism is called as circuit switched fallback. So it falls back to the circuit switched network whenever there is voice requirement and comes back into the 4G network as the default for data. So that is what is meant by circuit switch fallback or CSFP.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your informative session.
Thank you.
Over to you, Jeba ma'am.
Yes, ma'am. I am Jibapriya from PG and Research Department of Computer Science to deliver the vote of thanks. A very good evening to one and all present for this FDP session. On behalf of School of Computational Studies and PG and Research Department of Computer Science, I thank Mr. Sivan Ramachandran for his exceptional content delivery, which made this learning experience a memorable one. Engaging the audience is an art, and that in the afternoon timing is a very challenging task. Our guest has made today's afternoon a fruitful one by giving us a detailed insight into the field of telecommunication and networking. Thank you, sir, once again for your enlightened session. I take this opportunity to thank the management, principal, vice principal, who are the pillars of support for this event. I thank our research director, Dr. S.T. Deepa, for her guidance throughout. I thank the program coordinators and all the HODs for their encouragement. I thank all the participants who have made this event a successful one. Special thanks to Soshan technical team and e-certificate team for their constant support in hosting this event. Thank you once again for all your time and presence. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you once again.